Cubone is a very mysterious and tragic Pokemon, but also one of the most incomplete Pokemon in terms of lore, that the Pokedex entry gives us insight as to why it is, but not what it is. It lost its mother at birth. It also wears its mother's skull, never revealing its true face. So, it looks that way, but we don't really know this Pokemon's true identity. Is this already an existing known species of Pokemon, or is this the entirety of the species? Now, when it evolves into Marowak, the mystery deepens further. It collects bones from an unknown place. A Marowak graveyard exists somewhere in the world, rumors say. That's pretty intense, and it actually gets even more complex when we look at some other Pokedex entries. Marowak is the evolved form of a Cubone that has overcome its sadness at the loss of its mother and grown tough. So when it copes with its mother's death, it can finally evolve, and then it returns to the place of its mother's death, which is apparently a mass Marowak graveyard, which also implies that this is like a Marowak breeding ground, that this is some ancestral, primal, instinctual land where Marowak go to give birth, and it's probably very secluded. So the implied lore is this is a protected place, and it gives the time for a Cubone, which as a baby would be completely helpless in the wild, to somehow grow up, somehow become, old enough to fend for itself, but also take enough time to where its mother's body decomposes. So when we think about Pokemon come from eggs. So Marowak gives birth, dies immediately after, takes time for the egg to hatch. By the time that happens, Marowak has become a skeleton. Cubone then instinctually wears its mother's skull for protection, and then in the privacy of this just death wasteland, which probably traumatizes Cubone anymore, Cubone develops and eventually wanders off into the world, and then it eventually kind of grows up, accepts its mother's death, comes back, upgrades its weaponry, upgrades its skull, or maybe that's more of a part of the evolution, and then that's just kind of it. So does kind of paint a more full picture, but that hasn't stopped people from still trying to figure out this Pokemon's identity, which more relates to Kangaskhan by just observation and some other weird stuff. Now, the idea behind the Kangaskhan theory is that we don't really know what's going on with the baby inside of Kangaskhan's pouch, and it also seems to exist in a state of limbo. The infant rarely ventures out of its mother's protective pouch until it's 3 years old. However, Kangaskhan's maternal love is so deep that it will brave death to protect its offspring. So we kind of have like a Schrodinger's Pokemon inside the pouch of a Kangaskhan, that if it makes it to 3 years old, then it kind of becomes old enough to fend for itself and then become a Kangaskhan or whatever other Pokemon. Because the weird thing is that Kangaskhan can only be female, so that's kind of awkward from like a species standpoint. However, if not, Kangaskhan just straight up dies, and trying to protect its baby, if the baby survives that encounter because of Kangaskhan's sacrifice, then what happens to it? The prevailing theory is that it becomes a Cubone, mostly just based off of the appearances of this Pokemon. Now, this theory makes some sense in a couple of different ways, that when you look at the design of the baby Kangaskhan, it very closely resembles Cubones, so it's a very similar Pokemon right there that might also become more warped and more changed as it now has to adapt and survive on its own, but also the nature of Kangaskhan enables this Pokemon's existence as a potential Cubone. Now, the only glimpse that we have under Cubone's skull goes back to 1997 with the Cardaz trading card set. So it's pretty much like a very early form of Pokemon representation outside of the games, and it just kind of looks like some generic monster looking Pokemon, so that's kind of weird. However, in more modern times of Pokemon, there's been like a lot of breadcrumbs and a lot of hints from Game Freak to suggest that the Kangaskhan theory is correct, that Kangaskhan appears as an SOS Pokemon for Cubone. That's kind of wild. And also, in the Pokemon I Choose You movie, that when there's that intro sequence introducing us to the world of Pokemon and showing various Pokemon in their natural habitat, this is a very powerful and interesting image that has a lot of different implications. That is this Cubone frustrated at the love of a completely separate species of Pokemon, that we see a parent, we see a child, and then we just see resentment. Or is it that connection for the parent that Cubone and Marowak has lost? So there's a couple different ways of looking at it like this, but the similarities, or at least some connection between these Pokemon, whether it be purely emotional in the dichotomy between them, or maybe some kind of actual species resemblance, has been shown by Game Freak or by the Pokemon Company many different times. However, recent information about a Pokemon Red and Green beta version could prove the entire Kangaskhan Cubone theory completely false. So this goes back to the Helix Chamber, What Dreams May Come, prototype data from Pokemon Red and Green. So we have a Pokemon Red and Green prototype game that also has so many missing and lost Pokemon inside of it. It's insane, but this also goes back to very early Pokemon to the point where it's pretty much capsule monsters, and that's its own bit of lore. But pretty much, if you guys have seen a beta Pokemon video, those kind of blew up a couple years ago and people talk about them from time to time. And also, a lot of discussion recently about the discovery and data mining of the Pokemon Space World demo, which is the earliest version that we have of Generation 2. So, beta Pokemon are kind of hype, but more and more information keeps coming out about it that really changes the entire history, or the entirety of everything we thought we knew about beta Pokemon. For starters, we have the Satoshi Tajiri biography, which has given us more indexes, more unused Pokemon, and more original concepts in the form of very early artwork and data sheets and tables as they were developing the original Pokemon games. And the weird thing is, when you start breaking down into the index numbers, all of the unused Pokemon, or all of the unknown Pokemon, are literally missing now. That these Pokemon were created, there is some kind of data inside of the games that tries to reference to them, but since they weren't implemented, that's when we get the jumbled pixely mess that kind of screws with your game. So the idea of the Pokemon exists as a placeholder, but it doesn't exist inside the game, therefore glitch. Now, because of the incredible work of the Helix Chamber, as well as like Pokemon archival groups that go back and find ancient interviews, crazy lost information about Pokemon, the index list has actually been filled out pretty well, and we have an idea of the Pokemon that never made it past the Red and Green prototype, or at least into the final iterations of the original Pokemon games. And the weird thing is, this rewrites history in a very strange way. On the left is that this is the Pokemon index list, that a Pokemon's Pokedex order doesn't necessarily line up with its index value and how it's represented inside the games, and you're probably familiar with this because of the Trainer Fly glitch, that when you activate the Trainer Fly glitch, the Pokemon that appears, in certain cases Mew, if that's what you're going for, so also the Mew glitch is what this is well known from, but you can modify it into any Pokemon besides Mew, that the special stat turns into the index number of the Pokemon that appears at the end of the glitch. It's some pretty wild stuff, but it was always assumed that these were representations of Generation 2 Pokemon, because fun Pokemon trivia, in an interview with Shigeki Morimoto, he confirmed that there were originally going to be 190 Pokemon in Generation 1. This matches exactly with the fact that the last non-glitch Pokemon occurs at position 190, and strongly implies that 39 missing no are formatted Pokemon data. Now here is where Pokemon history is actively being rewritten, and our previous assumptions about the game to explain Missing No are being thrown out the window. Although, each of the copies of Missing No can appear as or become a Generation 2 Pokemon when traded there, these Pokemon are simply based on the Pokedex order, so are not indication of the original Pokemon in these slots. So that's when we go back to it, we can see that when traded over, these data values become a different Pokemon, which kind of goes into the idea that Generation 1 was supposed to be larger, and Generation 2 was a split from that. Then instead of 190 Pokemon, we have 151. This is long established trivia, but the assumption is kind of wrong, that when we actually compare it to the data tables, that balloon-looking thing doesn't look like Heracross, and whatever that Pokemon is on top right, that's certainly not a Ho-Oh. So it's placeholder data from scrap Pokemon, and not really an indication of anything from the original 190 being split into Generation 1 and Generation 2. So with all of that history out of the way, we can finally talk about Marowak's evolution. That's right, I said it. There's a scrapped Marowak evolution from the original Pokemon Red and Green version. That has so many implications, and don't worry, we're going to be getting into it. Now, you might hear this Pokemon's name being thrown around as Guardia, but this is actually false because it's a fan-given name. That the only thing we know about this Pokemon, as well as a lot of other prototype and lost Pokemon, is its back sprite. That is all that we have of Marowak's evolution, and this is also made a bit more clear from a Helix Chamber blurb. As a result, we'd like to apologize that in regard, we've removed the fan names we've made for the missing nose. That's what these things are. These are missing nose, and they're actually like lost and scrapped beta Pokemon from the original Generation 1. That's crazy to think about. And any references to our restoration ROM hacks interpretations from this article in order to prevent any further confusion. There have also been some edits made for factual correction and clarification, naturally. So yeah, just don't worry about the fan names and stuff like that. It might confuse things from the actual facts of what these Pokemon are, but it also gets really spooky because another way we can kind of confirm this as an evolution of Marowak is that it comes immediately after Marowak with the index number. So for all of these years, for all of these decades, for all of these attempts of the Trainer Fly glitch and the Mew glitch, the answer to what Cubone is has been in front of us the entire time, but it's been mislabeled as a Hitmontop Missing No. That the index number also fulfills lost evolutionary lines. That is one of the coolest and craziest things that you could ever hear about Pokemon. And if you enjoy that, or if you've enjoyed this entire video so far, please leave a like and share this video with all of your friends. We can't have this lost information just go even more unknown throughout the Pokemon community. That this is one of the most important things that could ever be known about Pokemon. So Twitter, Facebook, Discord, blast this video, leave a like, comment down below, because it's actually incredible. And also, by using the index values, we can debunk any argument that people might have saying like, oh, this is just a prototype Kangaskhan. No, Kangaskhan was already developed by that point. That Kangaskhan is actually the second Pokemon ever created behind Rhydon, and Rhydon goes back to the capsule monster days that the first showing, so the first expression of what would become Pokemon had a trainer character with a Rhydon, and that just shows number one, like Pokemon number one, and then Kangaskhan, Nidoran, and then the rest of the indexes come through. We are deep in the Pokedex by the time we get to Marowak and its evolution. So this is actually a Pokemon separate to Kangaskhan. Now, like I said earlier, unfortunately we only have the back sprite of this Pokemon, so any interpretation of its full form can only be expressed as an artistic guess. However, we do have some clues to go off of. It does look like a much more evolved Marowak that is holding a baby Cubone, which also kind of rewrites the lore about this Pokemon. Is it supposed to be that maybe instead of it dying immediately after giving birth, it's actually some kind of like crazy scavenging Pokemon that takes very precious care of its young and then tries to find like skulls to augment itself for battle and then make itself into a stronger Pokemon and then really set it apart from Kangaskhan? That Kangaskhan is supposed to be the maternal, love above all kind of parent Pokemon, whereas maybe this is the male version of Kangaskhan. That even though genders didn't exist in Generation 1, there's still Pokemon like Kangaskhan that come out as 100% female and Tauros that come out as 100% male. So maybe this is supposed to be like the male version of Kangaskhan, but still a completely separate species of Pokemon. That this is the more hard, tough life, the raw bones, the literal rawness of life in that kind of way. But since we don't really know what this Pokemon looks like, and it's effectively lost data from 1996 or earlier, we can only speculate, but it seems to really show that the idea of Cubone was definitely going in a different direction than what the fan theories have ended up at. Also kind of supporting this is that Marowak's original sprite had these back spikes that resemble its evolution and also keep what Cubone has. So it's really weird that Cubone has actually kept its back spikes with its back sprite through all these years, even though it's much less exaggerated. That when you're looking at the full evolutionary line, it almost seems like some kind of crazy Stegosaurus bones just coming out of this Pokemon's back, but it is kind of weird that, you know, Cubone has the back spikes, Marowak doesn't have them anymore, and then all of these other hints towards Marowak's evolution have just kind of been phased out throughout Pokemon. So it also makes me wonder, is Game Freak trying to make the Kangaskhan Cubone theory canon? Or are they giving us hints to that because the original origins of this Pokemon has been lost? Is this Cubone Marowak Kangaskhan showdown that's happening in a very modern movie supposed to represent that? Is this also what's being told? Is this the hidden story, the secret story of Cubone that is now coming to light in Generation 7 because Kangaskhan will come to the aid of Cubone because Cubone's original story has been lost? It was effectively retconned into Marowak dies, Cubone wears a skull. Hey, maybe it's actually Kangaskhan because that's how this Pokemon works now. Or is the Cubone Kangaskhan theory still debunked, and Kangaskhan is just that much of a mom? That, you know, world's #1 mom right here, any baby Pokemon, any child Pokemon in need, Kangaskhan will rush to defend it, even that Pokemon, with its life. And then it just kind of leads to all these other weird implications, because what if Kangaskhan dies trying to defend a Pokemon that isn't it, let alone a Cubone? That you faint the Kangaskhan, now Cubone's even more sad because another mom tried to help it, it died as well, and now we just have a crazy snowball spiraling depression Pokemon. I don't know, it's crazy guys, but overall, like I said, I feel like I can't stress the importance of all of this information, that the well-known and well-established index values of Pokemon that many Pokemon players have seen, have applied inside their games and experienced with Missing No, especially with the Virtual Console coming out and people that might not have been able to get a Game Boy or play the original Pokemon games having access to this glitch, having access to the inner workings of Pokemon and the remnants and all these artifacts of Pokemon's original design. Well, that's taken over 20 years to actually figure out what's going on. Then what's happened with this lost Pokemon? Will we ever see anything like this? Is this going to be a regional variant, Galarian Cubone, even though we already have a Alolan Marowak? So Alolan Marowak complicates this even more because that could have been the opportunity of bringing back this Pokemon, but it seems to have been permanently scrapped and then Cubone's story being retold. Now we have the Marowak Ghost. The Marowak Ghost is represented through Alolan Marowak, and that seems to be about as far as it goes, but the history of Pokemon kind of rewrites the history of Pokemon in this case. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.